right there, and you can have a conversation with us and tell us what we're doing or what we're looking at.
All right. So what was presented to Common Council is a proposal from a company called HR Works, who's an HR consultant. And what we were looking to do is have them come in, do a total comp study on all of our non-union employees.
Okay.
So the plan is for them to come in, assess where we currently are, look at market value, look at cities similar to us, look at their pay structures, and essentially build us a road for a true compensation plan. So kind of the what we've all seen before, that model that's 10, 15 years old, essentially redoing that and building us a plan so that it doesn't fall behind like it did for 10 or 15 years. So kind of building that progression and that roadmap for us.
So let me ask you a question. So you're looking at comparable pay scales, correct?
Correct.
So when we do this, are we raising the pay rates for the non-union people that you're looking at?
In theory, I mean, I think I can't say for sure that we're underpaid, but
Yeah,
I'm
we're
assuming we're underpaid. I mean, it's pretty glaring that we're underpaid. So there's no guarantee that we will adjust it immediately. But the plan, I mean, we need to use the data that we're provided. Otherwise, we're spending the money for no reason.
So have you gotten some data already, or we haven't approached it yet?
We haven't even approached it.
So if it's completely egregious, we would look at raising the rates, correct?
The plan is to make an adjustment to make us comparable to cities our size, to mostly, I mean, looking at private sectors kind of would skew our data, but comparing us to
Municipalities.
similar organizations, and then using that data to adjust internally as needed. And then, like I said, the roadmap path is them creating something so that we don't fall behind and we don't hit this issue where union wages are continuing to increase and everybody else is stagnant.
I'm sorry.
Is that right?
Okay, so let me ask you this question. Shut up. Okay, so with the union increases, they increased 2 to 3%, correct?
Recently, yeah, that's what it's been. It depends on what they negotiate for.
Okay, so we're looking at something in that category for the non-union workers.
Essentially, yes.
And then you'd have to wrap it into a budget,
Correct.
and we'd have to find the money.
Correct.
But isn't that what the city does annually anyway for raises, that somehow that they have to be within that somehow that every employee is entitled, quote unquote, in a sense, to a raise every year, which is 3%. Isn't that what you normally do?
So historically, I'd have to rely on Frank to know if we've done COLA adjustments, would be cost of living adjustments. But any other raises outside of that are discretionary. So it's up to the department head to submit something and then mayoral office to approve it.
So is the idea, and then Frank can come, is the idea is to kind of leave the discretion and set it like a standard.
Steps
Right,
every year.
So, yeah, so what we want to do is take a look at both COLA adjustments, because if we should be to be competitive, looking at 2 to 3% increases every year, that's something we need to address, because we're not, to my knowledge, not entirely doing that.
Because, not to take away what you're doing, because to my knowledge, truthfully, there are employees in this building that qualify for services. So we need to really take a good look at these wages.
Absolutely.
So I think that's exactly the point. We are so far out of step that even the 2 or 3% annuals, which are not automatic, and we've done in the last 2 years, but previous to that had not been done in 7 or 8 years, including the previous administration and the first couple of years of the Walsh administration. So we reinstituted those COLAs 2 years ago. We've been able to do them 2 years in a row. But what we're talking about with this compensation study is fundamentally looking at all non-union positions and saying, is there internal parity, so like jobs are paid equally, and is there external equity that to the greatest extent we possibly can, we align our non-union positions with other municipalities and other not-for-profits and similar organizations of similar size.
Because isn't COLA annually?
COLAs would be,
Right, because we're saying COLA, but COLA is annual.
well, yeah, I mean, we call them, some folks call them COLAs, we don't. We call them discretionary adjustments because COLA does tend to be considered as an annual, and we do not have any kind of policy that says we will do an annual increase. It's discretionary.
You're talking about the ranges in general, not just
Talking about the ranges, but also the way the jobs are graded and managed across the organization. So the best example I can give you right now is we've got 11 administrative assistants, executive administrative assistants. They are at predominantly all at the same grade, but they're not all at the same grade. So we have some that are at higher grades and paid more for doing precisely the same job. And some of that has come historically, some of that has come because some were better negotiators than others, and some because their bosses were better advocates than others. And what we need is the compensation study to come in and say, okay, let's look at the entire landscape, build a framework that and a roadmap that gets us to initial equity and parity, and then gives Rick and his team a framework to be able to keep that up to date.
But I get, sorry,
Management confidential, are they in there?
Yeah, it'd be, yeah, to Rick's point, all non-union, non-elected. Sorry.
I guess, and excuse my ignorance in this. It seems like we are going to study a problem we already know.
No, we're not going to study it.
So it's not necessarily studying it.
Okay.
We call it a compensation study, but it's more so this consultant is coming in and building for us. So they have access to Bureau of Labor Statistics, and there's a bunch of private firms that collect data on salaries. They have access to all of that. It would cost us a fortune to get access to that. So we're kind of using them to gain access to that knowledge. And then they're going to take that knowledge, share it with us, and say, okay, now that we know what people in Utica, Binghamton, Rochester's kind of tough to compare, but Rochester, now that we know their salaries, and not-for-profit kind of fall in that loop as well, looking at those and saying, okay, now we know what everybody is making around us. How do we get to that? And this is how we do it. We're going to make adjustments annually for whatever percentage, and they're going to give us a recommendation to get us up to par with, to be competitive, essentially.
Yeah, precisely. So compensation is both an art and a science. And there are people that dedicate their entire working careers to knowing how to do compensation. So what they'll do is they'll come in and they'll identify somewhere between 10 and 15, usually they call them dimensions. And so they'll identify those dimensions as part of the way we describe jobs. So think of them as responsibilities. So what they do is they build a vocabulary so you can say, this commissioner is the same as that commissioner, or they're not. This one has more responsibility than this commissioner, so that you're ultimately comparing apples to apples. This deputy is the same as that assistant director. So they build that vocabulary, they build that framework, they give Rick and his team the equation that will probably take us for, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 8 years. They're usually good for about half a decade. And then they just get so out of whack over time that you got to go back and do it again.
And you talked about saying this deputy is the same as this director. You talked about looking at the money piece of it, but you also talked about looking at, for lack of a better word, the grade of it. So now you would take this deputy away and make them what, a director, or make the director a deputy, or what, how would that work?
You rarely change titles, but you do. You build a framework that allows you to move towards it. We're not starting from the beginning, Councilman. Just kidding. Obviously, we'll start wherever you need us to. So it builds that vocabulary, and then they build a ramp to get you there. So they'll build you a ramp to get you there with both your titles and with your salaries and with your salary framework. And then to your point, President Hudson, we have to fit that into a budget. And we may say the gap is so large, we have to do it over 3 years. Or it's a relatively small group of people, we may say.
What's the number
we can
for
absorb it.
relatively small?
I don't,
We're looking at 150
yeah,
positions.
150.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, yeah, but
mean,
compared
compared
to
to the labor
1,500, total employees.
About 10%.
And okay, one quick question, then I'm gonna be quiet. So are these people that we're talking about out of the 150, are they on the city payroll or are they on the SURA payroll?
They'd be both. Anybody who's non-represented, non-elected.
So are we gonna look to move them to the city payroll and off the SURA payroll?
We're doing that, we do that incrementally now. As those positions come up, we review them, and if it makes sense to, and in many cases it does, we move them to the city, and we try to avoid, I'm not saying we're always successful at it, but we try to avoid putting anybody new that doesn't belong in SURA on SURA.
But be quiet now.
That's not perfect. Me too.
No, you gonna be brought back, so you might as well sit on the front row. No, I'm just playing.
Sit next to me.
So remind me of the cost again. What's the cost?
So the not to exceed amount is $34,999.
And there were some associated costs with that, but you did tell me a little bit about that just the other day, that were included in the 34,000, right? Like stay and things like that.
Yeah, so there is a clause in there that any travel and stuff like that would need to be included. And I spoke with the consultants, and it's going to be the Syracuse office that's working on this, not the Rochester office. So they don't expect any travel.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But they are nationwide, so they do travel all across the nation. That's why that's in their clause, or in their contract.
And the intention is for this not to collect dust. We're gonna look at it and.
If
really
this
do something
collects
about it.
dust, we're fundamentally sinking our ship. I mean, it's going to be bad. So we absolutely need to take action on this.
Of that 150 positions, how many of those are empty or not filled currently?
So, trying to think, we're probably looking at 20 maybe that might be vacant. That
That's
would
kind
be
of
a
the whole
stretch.
reason, right? We can't be competitive in the market, so we can't hire in finance needed consulting firm to help them finish the year, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, yeah, so we're not competitive with
So
like organizations.
The critical positions are the ones that you just mentioned. Anything that has a technical expertise. We're hurting all over, but anything that's a technical expertise, we're really behind on.
So the positions that currently have an employee, from the base salary that they're now, if we're gonna reevaluate all of that, which is what this contract is about, right? Are we gonna scale how we increase the salaries, or do they just go up all in one?
No, they normally will build a ramp. I can't speak to these folks, but when I've done this in the past, they'll build you a ramp. That depends on how big the gap is. So if the gap is going to be too steep to fill in 1 year, they'll build you a ramp so that you can do it
that
equitably.
in grades, right?
Yep.
Is that how we?
Yep.
So it would go from grade 1 to 10
Yeah, again, in my experience, I don't know these folks specifically, my experience is they usually come in with a whole new grading system and just map everybody over from the old system to a new system. It's too difficult to try and make adjustments in an existing system.
So their plan is to essentially mimic like CSEA is the easiest example, and set grades and steps. And then, like Frank said, plotting each job on that grade and step, like we currently have, but more robust, and then giving us a plan to make sure that grade and step, the job itself is going to remain essentially the same, but the grade and step should adjust. So in 5 years, what does a grade 7 look like? It shouldn't be the same thing as it is
my
now.
question.
So we adjust that grade, and then as we do, people move in that grade accordingly. So if that makes more sense. So we're moving the grades constantly to adjust and make it market value.
So in addition to looking at the ranges and improving those, it sounds like the fact that you haven't been giving regular, other than
Raises.
COLA, but regular raises like the union folks do is a problem. So do you already anticipate that that's gonna have to be built into the new plan?
The anticipation, yeah, absolutely.
So changing the ranges and then an automatic every year percentage increase, whether it be, do you already know what the range increase would be? Would it be like 0.5% to 4%, or there's no range for that?
That's part of what we're paying them to do.
To figure out how, it depends on how drastic the difference is. That it could be, we could be pushing 4 annually for a certain percent, or like a certain time frame, and then reduce down to a 2% or something like that.
Does that come back to council also to approve your new ranges and things? Okay. Got it.
Now, would this mean that if it does come back, that we do need to go to that direction? Would we also be looking at retro and stuff like that, or we wouldn't consider any of that?
No, yeah, I'm trying to think how to polite. No, there wouldn't be a retro, because
You need approval.
the comp structure we're using now is so far out of date. We're talking 10, 15 years of retro pays. But it's also, when you look at compensation, you're not looking at 15 years ago saying, okay, now we're 30% higher. There's a compounding way to get to where we need to be. So to do the math, to go back and see how you would compound 3% annually for a retro pay, it would be,
We couldn't afford that.
and quite frankly, I don't think we could afford
And the point is to have a good workforce for the future, and at this point, as sad
That
as it
ship
is, like
sailed,
that, yeah,
unfortunately,
that's-
but
yeah.
Retro is really exclusively for union members that were out of contract. So they're out of contract for 2 years through no fault of their own, theoretically, so we go back and pay them retro, but for non-union.
Yeah.
employees, retro doesn't afford anything.
Last question. This is obviously something API is not skilled to do, right?
No, but this is absolutely, there's a real science to this.
Okay.
They'll do regression analysis, and, I mean, they go crazy on these things. So
Okay.
They build a whole framework, so yeah, they don't need API, to my knowledge, unless it's hidden talent.
yeah, not that I know, so.
So I have a question, just as a follow-up on something she just mentioned. If we're gonna be incrementing also like the yearly 3%, 2%, whatever that may come up to be, with these 100, 190 potential people, employees, then we need to do that across the board. Do we do that already, or is this gonna be an implementation starting here? And
So we built 3%, we built a 3% discretionary pool into the current budget that you approved. So that piece is already there. And the mayor and Rick and his team will be making a recommendation to the mayor for how that pool that is in the current approved budget gets distributed. Last year, a portion of that was distributed across the board. And some of it was used for market adjustments and promotions. So this, in the upcoming budget, my expectation would be there'd be a 2 to 3% pool as there is now, plus some kind of a market adjustment depending on whatever ramp these folks suggest. So it would definitely be more than what is currently there.
are these positions part of the ones that you haven't been able to employ because
A lot of them are.
a lot of them are?
And a lot of them are folks, I mean, to Rick's point, to your point, Councilmember Joe, if this sits on the shelf, we have a pipeline of folks and supervisors who are looking to get people in higher salaries, and we've been holding them off by saying, we're doing a comp study, and, in January, we'll be hopefully proposing adjustments for the coming year.
Now, with And maybe this has already passed. Was there an RFP for this, or was this?
So our expectation was it was going to be, it's a little more expensive than we anticipated. We thought it was going to be under 35,000, so it didn't need to be RFP'd. We did get 3 bids.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, we saw 3 bids.
okay.
What did you carve out for it? You said under 35.
I've had $30,000 in the budget to do this since I showed up here.
The letter is 34,990.
Yeah,
Exactly.
because
999.
because they all came in more than the 35. We did not expect them to come in at more than the 35, and they did. So we told these folks that that was the maximum we could pay because we didn't want to take the time to go back out to a
Not
full
gonna give them the
RFP.
extra dollar.
And part of it, part of this proposal that we went back to HR Works with is we said, if we encroach on that $35,000 budget, we need a way to offload this project. So we can't have it stop, to your point. There's, A, if we don't use it, that's a problem. B, if it stops mid-project, that's a problem. So they are currently, this went through our legal team, it's with their legal team now, to make the adjustments that our legal team said need to be made. But we're having them write in a contingency that should we encroach on that maximum budget, that they are going to not just turn over the project to us and say good luck, they're going to essentially teach us how to finish the project. And somebody on our team will manage the project if we hit that budget, which we don't anticipate hitting. So.
Now, did you say HR1 is in the city, you said, or?
Their office is technically in East Syracuse.
Okay.
So 2 of the 3, well, technically we went to 4. We went to a national, 2 are in East Syracuse and 1 is in Syracuse.
So we would be looking, if we say yes, we will be looking at January to start moving the rates for people.
Yeah, so they anticipate this taking between 4 to 6 months. So I think there's going to be an adjustment that Frank and I need to coordinate on for January. And then, in theory, this needs to be done by the time we build our budget. So we're really hoping that the first month or so into the new year, we will be able to build our budgets accordingly.
So an adjustment would be like a little increase before we get to the real amount? Oh, okay.
Yeah, depending on what's available in the budget currently.
And how many people do we employ with this contract? Just the one, or?
It's a
How
whole
many people
team.
from HR Works will be working on this?
They have, it's a whole slew of folks. So it depends on the stage. So data collection, our dedicated team, I think, is going to be 4 people.
So the 155 per hour is divided amongst them?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
It's a good salary.
yeah, no, that's for the team
Okay.
per hour.
Okay.
And then the actual construction of the plan and the roadmap, I think is 2 people, and then it'll essentially be turned over to 1 consultant to bring back to us in one
The
cohesive.
information on that. Okay.
So they're gonna look at comparable areas, right? Because, I mean, I don't want them to try to compare our wage rate to the county's wage rate because that's a little off.
It's a little off, and so
Yeah, I was going to say, that's where it's an art and a science. So there's a science to it. There's a whole discipline. There's standards that folks that are professional compensation consultants use. But there's an art to, it's like a real estate agent picking comps, right? Do you pick just the one next door? Do you go 2 blocks over? Is 2 blocks too far? So there's an art to picking what the
rates
comparables are. So is Onondaga County right? They're bigger than us. They have a larger budget. They got a larger tax base. Is that the right one, or do you look at Utica or a city that is more comparable and reflects us better? They'll do a little bit of both.
Because I kind of heard what Rick said, so I heard him talk about the not-for-profits too. So do you take all of that, and do they take all of that and just put it in the buckets and start comparing them with the not-for-profits, with the municipalities, and look at where the rate structure should fall at?
yeah, so essentially what they're going to do is they're going to pull all of that data and then say, okay, who are we most similar to? Because if it is Binghamton or Utica or Rochester that we like, Rochester's a larger city, but we are pretty close in tax revenue or whatever, they'll find who we meet closest to and say, okay, that's part one is saying that do we or don't we meet where they are? And then part two is where should they be? So they look at those organizations and say, okay, are they underpaid? Like if Rochester's underpaid and we're comparing ourselves to Rochester, it doesn't do us any good. So they look for, step one is finding who's comparable. Step two is who's where they should be, and using those to then drive our numbers of where we should be as well. Does that make sense?
Or where we can be,
Or where we can be, yeah.
because should and can, yeah.
Should and can, and they're aware that this is all dependent on a budget as well. I mean, ideally, we are going to save money in the near future in some other areas. That
And we probably save money if we can hire people and fill some of these vacancies.
right.
Amen.
So it's what came first, the chicken or the egg scenario, and I don't want to guess anymore. We need to take action.
And I think, you know, eventually as a city, this may be a hard decision we have to look at. Do we continue to pay people pennies and suffer with picking up skills, or do we step it up?
No,
and-
we know what we have to do. We need to bring people comparable to where they need to be to keep people working.
Absolutely.
We're already stepping it up with hiring consultants to fill the void because we can't hire. So we're paying, I think, through the nose for that service.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it be better to pay our own people a better wage? So do they compare, obviously, they're doing municipality, like you said, Utica, but are they comparing the private sector in there as well?
So they'll take a look at private sector, but I mean, private sector is always going
We'll
to be
never
higher.
meet that.
We'll never meet. I mean, I shouldn't say never.
Right.
There are ways that we could continue to save money, build a budget to do that. It would be a difficult, long build, but it is feasible. But realistically, I mean, we can look at that and have that be our goal, but to be
If
able
you
to get
just
there
took-
from this study would be tough.
Three off the top of my head. Finance, law, IT. We're never
We're never.
We're
yeah,
never going to, in those three areas, we're never going to compete in the market. Our first-year associates in corporation counsel make half of what they would make in the private sector. IT is probably at least half, and accounting periodically. The Commissioner of Finance sends me a Robert Half study, which is Robert Half is a private. They put this together just for the private market for accountants, and lets me know that he's underpaid by a third. And it is.
Therefore,
It's
the
true.
revolving door.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. So those three areas will never come. We'll get closer, but you know we can diminish the gap, but we're never going to close the gap, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise.
And the other last part of it, not to take away from comp, but part of their agreement as well is storytelling. So they're going to work with folks in my office to build what do our benefits look like. Yes, medical, dental, and vision are great. I mean, comp is something that we need as well. Those don't pay our mortgage, so we need to make sure that's fair. Medical, dental, and vision are great, but what else do we have? What are those hidden things that we are privy to as government employees that we aren't exploiting? Like the land bank, all of those things. How do we build a statement to people saying
Forgiveness.
loan forgiveness, exactly, saying
of the list.
the salary will never be as good as private sector, but we're getting better, and you have all of this other stuff that you get from being a Syracuse city employee. So that's
It kind of equates, yeah.
right. So that's and taking a look at if there's anything we can do to better that might be cost effective, free,
So they're gonna help you with that?
yes, that's part of
that's
their
good.
contract.
Excellent.
We just
So-
need that help too, because
I
of
like
all the
that.
other perks that they could be taking advantage
Absolutely.
of.
Good.
So one more quick question, because we know that this hasn't been done for a couple decades. So I know that this administration is going to their last terms. So do you see, well, you can't foresee what the next administration is going to do, but should this be looked at periodically, or will it just catch up with itself?
No, they're usually, in general, the recommendation is somewhere between 5 and 10 years. Usually if you target, it's a 6, 7, 8 year cycle to redo your comp study, you're probably okay. If you let it go longer than that, you end up where we are
Where
now.
we are.
Right. So what they'll do is they'll leave us for adjustments, smaller adjustments to be made. But like to Frank's point, you're pushing out a certain time frame because you never know what's going to happen in between. Like the current market is much different than it was 4 years ago. So even on a 4-year cycle, you're kind of wrenches are being thrown in your gears. So it does need to be looked at periodically, but we will make small adjustments between those desired cycle plans. And they'll let us know, hey, that's good for about 5 years. You might be back in 3 because something crazy happens. Or if inflation kind of cools down, you might be good for 8. And, building that into a budget that in 5 to 8 years, we can take a look at this again and make sure that we're still being competitive.
Oh, be God.
Now, does this become a public document where, it's available if somebody want to look at it because, for whatever reason? Or is this one of those shelf books that you keep at our HR office? And
I mean, I think the end result is going to be public because people are going to be seeing what we're doing with that money. Salaries are public anyways. I don't have an issue with sharing this information. I don't think that's unfair to ask, but
I don't know if they have any, do they have a intellectual property clause?
You don't need
'Cause
to
some-
attach it to a name, just a position, right?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they use some proprietary black box algorithm, but
no, they don't.
they don't, yeah. So it's likely that it will be public document.
I am. Do you have more questions? You look like you do.
I'm good.
Okay.
The value of parking spaces will get built into the study.
Don't be cute,
Good way to
Frank.
close,
Don't be
right?
cute. Don't be cute, Franklin. Is your name Franklin? Is your name Franklin?